is Samit Bose, and my presentation is on the legacy of housing discrimination in New Jersey. First, I'm going to talk about the post-World War II effects on housing. Then I'll talk about urban renewal and community activism in response to urban renewal. And then I'll finish up with the Mount Laurel Doctrine. So why do I care about this history? I'm actually from Mount Laurel, where the Mount Laurel Doctrine is based off of, and I actually grew up a mile away from the Ethel Lawrence homes for affordable housing. Additionally, I actually volunteered at a daycare center for kids living in the Ethel Lawrence homes. But kind of shockingly, I didn't know anything about the history of Ethel Lawrence or just the place until I did research for this video, which that's kind of disappointing, right? So by educating and promoting awareness about housing discrimination, we can ensure that for future generations, we can prevent housing discrimination from happening. So first up, the rise of suburbia and post-World War II housing policies. After World War II, returning soldiers had access to benefits from the GI Bill, primarily low-interest loans through the FHA. But if you were a black person or just a minority, you were often restricted from getting access to these low-interest loans thanks to the FHA policy of redlining. But, let's say you were able to get around that, you were able to get a loan. Many neighborhoods and townships had racial covenants where if you weren't white, you were not allowed to buy into that neighborhood. So that's just another way black people were prevented from getting housing. In addition to governmental rules preventing black people from getting housing, corporate rules also prevented people from getting housing. The company behind Levittown's, the Levitt organization, openly refused to sell to black Americans for 2 decades after the war. So it wasn't just governments, it was also corporations. And it was also people. People in the Levittowns were against black people moving into their neighborhood. And you can see in this interview right here.
You're aware that I feel about it. How do you feel about the Myers moving in?
Well, I'm very definitely against it.
So it was governments, corporations, and the people in the Levittowns. They were all against black Americans moving in. And you may think, maybe this just happened in the South or, no, it happened in New Jersey.
I'm on Wayne Avenue in the Bergen County town of River Edge, where, like many people across New Jersey, residents are unaware of a disturbing fact about their neighborhood. It says no persons of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or any land.
It's incredible.
These homes, including Suzanne Lyons' home, were built decades ago for white people only. It's found in the deed filed in 1940 for a large section of a 100-acre family were selling to a developer who would build many of these homes. A clause that reads, no person of any race other than the Caucasian race shall use or occupy any building or lot.
So, if you think about it, home ownership is the main way lower income and middle class families build wealth. So post-World War II, white Americans in New Jersey were able to accumulate wealth through housing and then pass it on down through the next generation. But because governments, corporations, and people in general, black Americans were excluded from home ownership. They were excluded from this opportunity to build generational wealth.
You're aware.
So next, let's talk about white flight and how it led to urban renewal. So, as mentioned earlier, white families moved to the suburbs, fleeing the cities. And when they left the cities, they also took their wealth and their tax revenue with them. This led to an economic decline in urban areas, and this outflow of resources actually made poverty and unemployment in New York worse, or just the cities in general worse. And in New York specifically, it contributed to the deterioration of infrastructure and public services. As a result of this deterioration, many cities, New York in particular, underwent urban renewal, where oftentimes low-income minority families were displaced and small businesses were often removed and oftentimes permanently closed. And talking more about Newark, in Newark, thanks to the policies of urban renewal, over 10,000 buildings and 2,500 acres were demolished and 50,000 people were displaced, a majority of whom were black and Hispanic. But while that is, those are the downsides, there was also people rising up against urban renewal. Case in point, New York was set to demolish 150 acres in the city's most densely populated black community to build a medical school, which I don't think it's a coincidence they picked the most densely populated black community. Um, but in response to this, Louis Epperson, just a local resident, she joined forces with a local community activist, and they sued the government together. And I think the timing on this is really important. This took place a year after the New York Rebellion. As a result of this, authorities were actually willing to listen to everyday residents because they know what would happen if they didn't. And because of this, major positives happened. Instead of 150 acres being demolished, it was only 58. Additionally, new housing would be built and the local hospital would be upgraded. Additionally, minorities would be hired as contractors and as apprenticeships to help build a medical school. And in addition to that, once the hospital was built, they would have special programs for Black and Latino students to get medical and dental training. And I think it's important that you understand what happened here was not urban renewal, but investing in your community. Urban renewal is when a government comes in, doesn't listen to the people, kicks them all out, and builds something new. In this instance, the government listened to the people and they worked with them to invest in their community. So as a result, a positive outcome emerged. And we actually have a video of Louise Epperson talking about her activism.
People did not want to move, but people had no choice. There were a lot of people who actually died from heart attacks. They were so distraught over the fact that they had to move. Nobody was looking to move or wanted to move. It was just chaos. You see, the city had already destroyed about 20 blocks before the med school agreement. And those blocks that they'd taken all the houses down made us have a shortage of houses everywhere.
So I think that's just another example of how Black people in particular were restricted from owning homes. Thanks to urban renewal, the homes that they were already living in ended up getting destroyed, and the places that were built in place of them, oftentimes they couldn't afford. So that's just another way Black Americans, particularly in New Jersey, were denied access to housing. But now let's talk about the Mount Laurel Doctrine. So it was just another case of urban renewal. Town officials were going to tear down housing, and once again, like in Newark, a local resident partnered with another activist organization to sue the government. This time on the grounds that the zoning laws excluded low-income residents from obtaining housing. And the case went all the way to the state Supreme Court, where they very surprisingly ruled that every single town or municipality in New Jersey had to build their fair share of affordable housing. And it's been estimated that over 70,000 units of affordable housing was built because of this decision. So that's just another way local community activism society benefited New Jersey. But despite that, the Mount Laurel Doctrine has been undermined. In Cherry Hill, which is a town right next to Mount Laurel, 54 units but it's also important, Cherry Hill is a much more affluent town than Mount Laurel, so keep that in mind. But in Cherry Hill, 54 units of affordable housing was approved in 2001. But owners of single-family homes near where the housing was going to be built sued to stop the building twice, and they lost twice. But because of these lawsuits, so much time passed that Cherry Hill's planning board made the original developer apply for approval again. And at a board meeting, a homeowner said publicly, this is the most surprising part, he said, "We don't want buses of people coming in from Camden," which, I mean, once again, I talked about post-World War II, Black Americans were denied access to housing. This is 2010, and people are trying to deny primarily Black and, in this case, also Latino Americans access to housing. And there were more delays and more judgments, and it took until 2021 to finish the building of it. It took 20 years to build 54 units of affordable housing. And surprise, surprise, residents actually have not complained. Any anger from neighbors and other homeowners dissipated because I guess they finally realized people in affordable housing, they don't want to commit crimes, they just want affordable housing, they just want a place to live. And I think it's really important. It's not just World War II, it's present day. It's this legacy of housing discrimination still has effects today. 2010 was just 14 years ago. So I think it's really important that we learn this history and we do everything we can to ensure that we prevent this from happening again. So that's my presentation. This is my works cited, and I hope you learned something new.